So here we are again. Now we're going to have actually 4 in a row now. It's going to be this one tonight, then next week is going to be a video that's going to be kind of complement to this one, I think, I hope. Then one on Meherabad in the West and controversies, and then the next week will be videos on musts that I've done, and then the next one will be the must will be the next one in the order. So there's a video, and that'll give me a little room to stretch out. So, Meherabad of Ahmednagar and the Aesthetics of Religious Symbolism, a series of 10 biographical talks by Dr. James Newell, that's me. Talk 4, Early Ministry and Silence, and also Gathering of the Disciples. So, welcome, thank you all for coming, each and every one of you. And the plan for tonight's talk is to pick up where we left off last time, with Meherabad leaving Upasani Maharaj's ashram in Sikori, moving out of his parents' home, establishing his own place of residence on Ferguson College Road in Pune, and beginning to function as an independent spiritual master. Meherabad had already attracted many devotees to himself. If you remember, he was in Baramji, and Meherabad had started a toddy shop together in the Kasbah Peth area and attracted many, many people from there. Even had a little temple for Upasani Maharaj. And so there was those people, also people from Sikori who were connected to him through Upasani Maharaj's ashram, some people Upasani sent to him. But he began to function as an independent master, and this is a very unique occurrence in many ways, especially because it's not typical, in fact really unheard of, for a Zoroastrian to become a spiritual master. There's no such tradition among Zoroastrians. They're Dasturs. If you remember the street in Pune that goes by Baba's house, they eventually named it after Meher Baba, but they called it Meher Dastur Road because the only thing they could think of as Parsis was a priest, and Dastur is a priest, like Jal Dastur is the caste of the priestly caste of Zoroastrians. So, in addition to that, there were many people who followed him. It wasn't just Hindu. Usually a guru will have Hindu followers, but there were Hindus, Muslims, Zoroastrians, and people of various ethnicities. So the main question that we're still interested in is what is it that happened to Meherabad? And this is the 4th of a series of 10 talks on Meher Baba. We'll be looking at essentially the first 9 years of Meher Baba's ministry tonight. Last time we focused on Meherabad's initial experiences with Hazrat Babajan and his other masters. Given the amount of hagiographic material, meaning this material that's just questionable factually, we started right in with Meher Baba's own description of his subjective experience from a talk he gave at Meherabad in 1955. And that's kind of diving right into the religious narrative of how he interpreted his own experience. So, as in previous talks, my approach to Meher Baba's life in this series of lectures is academic, specifically from the perspective of the history of religions. And from that perspective, we're still confronted with this question that we were confronted with last time. What happened to Meherabad? He was a nice boy, going to school, didn't hang out with riffraff, and all of a sudden he's hanging out with Babajan, and everything kind of went to hell from there as far as Shireen was concerned, as far as his mother was concerned. And what I'm going to do is while trying to address that question in a way that anybody can understand, where you don't have to just, through an act of faith, decide, okay, I'm just going to jump right in. Someone who has questions and doesn't want to jump right into the faith, how can we explain it to them? So I'm going to begin with Meherabad's, and when I say Meherabad or Meher Baba, Meherabad means before mid-1922, before people started calling him Meher Baba. So I want to start with his own interpretation and then attempt to understand his subsequent activities symbolically. And as the title of the series is The Aesthetics of Religious Symbolism, so the idea is that aesthetics is a study of what is beautiful, how do we tell what's beautiful? How do we study beauty and understand beauty? So what makes a certain kind of symbolism beautiful, and what makes another kind of symbolism last for thousands of years, and other kinds just disappear or just aren't as interesting to people? So I feel, in trying to understand Meher Baba in a way that is at least somewhat understandable to people who are not going to enter right into the religious narrative, it's important that we understand not only Meherwan's own interpretation of his experience with Baba Jan and Upasani Maharaj and the other masters, but also it's important to understand what he felt was his duty or his mission in response to this experience. In other words, he had this experience. It was completely disorienting until, as he describes it, Upasani Maharaj helped him to kind of reintegrate. And then he clearly felt that there was a mission, there was a duty that he had to perform. And this is even underlined, I won't get into detail on this tonight, but that's underlined by this this interesting dynamic that went on between Meherwan and Upasani, and later Meher Baba and Upasani. Because Upasani kept saying, at least Meher Baba's interpretation of it was that Upasani knew this great weight that was falling upon him, the suffering and the responsibility that was falling upon him, and he wanted to take some of that away from him and kind of take on some of the burden. And Meher Baba kept saying, no, this is my duty to take on. So how did he understand that? Why did he do the things he did? That's going to be the focus of at least laying the groundwork before I get into the details of various events historically that happened in Meher Baba's life between January 1922, and I'm going to pretty much stop around 1929, but that's because this film is going to fill in the gap between 29 and 31. I hope it's going to cover a specific area, which is his relationship with Ali, and I'll leave it at that. So my first claim, or my argument in this regard, in regard to Meherwan's duty and his understanding of himself and his work, is that Meherwan had complete conviction in the reality and importance of his spiritual experience. And he had complete confidence in the importance of what he saw as the work that fell to him as a result of this spiritual experience. He equally had complete confidence in his own ability to complete this work and to enter into it. And I say that, it may seem obvious to people, particularly those of us familiar with Meher Baba, that he was confident about what he's doing, but it was pretty unusual for someone going through that kind of experience, having that much social and other pressure on him, to just not have any regard for whether people understood what he was doing or not. He was just completely confident that what he was doing was important and he was going to follow through. The other thing is that if you're going to look at this situation of someone who's become apparently unbalanced, or even Baba himself will say that he was unbalanced during that period. He was not able to integrate and focus and work in the world, and by diagnostic categories, that's someone who's emotionally and psychologically unbalanced. So people are going to say that, okay, either he's just crazy, or he's doing this in order to bring attention to himself, or he's doing this, he's deluded. That's another possibility. And the third, or I don't know what the number is, but say third possibility would be that he's deliberately sort of couldn't get work doing anything else, so he decided to become a spiritual master and try to get some money. But this is how these are the natural places the mind goes when someone is not really paying attention. My confidence is that when you follow these arguments through, you see that there's something much more substantial there. So that's why I present it in that way. And one piece of evidence that certainly, at least that early on, very early in his experience, while he was still in a space of being disoriented, as early as 1918, Meherwan was writing ghazals in praise of Baba Jan and Maharaj. I quoted the one from Baba Jan last week, or last time. In this ghazal, he thanks her for transforming both his consciousness and his spiritual status. And this is a quote from the ghazal: "In the twinkling of an eye, you made a lover into God, and God I have become. So as early as 1918, he had that sense. Then additionally, toward the end of 1921, according to Meher Baba's self-report, Meherwan spent a final 6 months with Upasani Maharaj, and quote, "During those 6 months, Maharaj and I used to sit near each other in a hut behind closed doors almost every night. On one such occasion, Maharaj folded his hands to me and said, 'Meherwan, you are the avatar, and I salute you.'" Now, to another group, I might give you a definition of avatar, but I'm going to just skip that over here. So, according to the religious narrative, and according to Meher Baba's own statements, from at least January 1922, Meherwan understood himself to be not only what he describes as self-realized, and he doesn't say God-realized, he says self-realization. And if you pay attention, it's very interesting throughout Meher Baba's discourses. He seems to prefer to say either self-realized, and even more of a preference he seems to have for truth realized. He uses the word God, it appears to me from looking at all the literature. He uses that because people are familiar with that. Also, maybe because it kind of messes with people who are resistant to it, and also because when you say God, if you say I'm one with God, people think, well, he's an egomaniac. If you say one with truth, they're not quite so. And he seems to deliberately, and I'm going to get into this in a minute, he seems to deliberately want to alienate people who are going to be, if you're going to be critical, get it over with and then leave me alone. He kind of wanted to put up a boundary, I think, like a red velvet rope policy where you had to get admission, and the admission was that you open your heart up. So, according to the religious narrative, Sid is the avatar. He described himself as self-realized, but also, excuse me, of a high spiritual status, effectively an incarnation of God. This is the difference between just being truth realized and being an avatar, is that you are specifically incarnate. And although Meher Baba had his own definition of avatar, the one place where it is in line with the traditional definition is that it's an incarnation of the deity. So, or to use Upasani Maharaj's term, the avatar, there are nuances to this idea of avatar, which I just mentioned, and we'll explore those more in detail as the story progresses, not this time, but later. So, what was Meherwan's work? The work that he now felt was his responsibility, and as a result of his new consciousness and status, had to go about pursuing. Again, in order to understand Meherwan's own understanding of this work, we will want to enter into the religious narrative through which Meherwan described his own experience of himself, of the world around him, and of his work. So to this end, I want to look at two quotes from later. These are later in Meherwan's life, but based on some other quotes I'm going to read, I think it's safe to say that he certainly claimed that from the time he was kissed by Babajan, he never lost his sense of being one with God. He just couldn't integrate that into illusion. Then after he left Upasani Maharaj's, he was fully integrated. And he'll describe this in a second. So, but before I get to that, I want to read one quote from the Discourses and one from the Foreword to the Wayfarers that we read last time, but it helps to orient us in terms of how very differently he perceived himself and the world from you or me or any average person. So this is a discourse on Maya. Maya, of course, is a Hindu word, and Meher Baba, again, had his own specific definition. That's a principle of ignorance. But he's already been talking a little bit, and he's going to say, this is from the discourse number 1 on Maya, and under the subheading, taking as unimportant that which is important. So, the working of Maya also expresses itself by making an important thing seem unimportant. From the spiritual point of view, the only thing which has importance is God. Very few persons, now that's a religious claim, but this is part of the framework within which he's operating. Very few persons are really interested in God for his own sake, for God's own sake. If the worldly minded turn to God at all, it is mostly for their own selfish and mundane purposes. They want something, they want a boon of some kind. They seek the gratification of their own desires, hopes, and even revenges through the intervention of the God of their, of their imagination. They do not seek God as truth. There he is again equating God with truth. They long for all things except the only truth, which they regard as unimportant. This again is the blinding of vision caused by the working of Maya. This is the principle of ignorance caused by Maya. People pursue their happiness through everything except God, who is the only unfailing source of abiding joy. Now, what I'm going to claim here is that one of the reasons Meherabad seems so out of sync with what we take as being the norm is that unlike us, or average people, who take the unimportant as important and the important as unimportant, Meherabad, by his claim, is that he takes the important, which is God, as important, and everything else, literally everything else, as unimportant. So that's one of the remarkable things is when you begin to think about that and see his behavior, you see that that's actually a more, that's a consistent factor that we find throughout his life and certainly early on in some of the things he's doing. So this is the quote from the Wayfarers, the discourse on the musts, and this is the section, I think it's in part 2, where he talks about the difference between abnormal and supernormal. There's normal, which is the average, and then there's abnormal, which is below the average, and supernormal, which is above the average. So confusion between the abnormal and the supernormal states of consciousness arises due to mixing up two ways of interpreting and measuring madness and its degrees. According to one way of interpretation, madness is a deviation from the average mode of consciousness and behavior, and its degree is to be measured by the amount of its departure from the average pattern. So if everybody starts wearing funny hats, that's normal. That's the average thing, because everybody does that, so it's nothing mad about that. You're just doing the normal thing. But according to another way of interpretation of madness, madness is the incapacity of consciousness to understand or express truth. Now again, he, at least implicitly, he hasn't capitalized truth here, but he's implicitly equating truth with God. To understand or express truth, and its degree the degree of madness is to be measured by the extent to which it, madness or consciousness, deviates from truth. If these two distinct standards are mixed up with each other and applied simultaneously, they inevitably lead to a confusion between the abnormal mad states and the supernormal must states. So we say that there are people who are closer to truth, who seem mad because they're above the average. When the must states are measured by the standard of the average pattern of responses and actions, they will inevitably be interpreted as having an even greater degree of madness than ordinary madness. But if we change the standard, they will be interpreted differently. When the must states are measured by the standard of realization and expression of truth, they will inevitably be interpreted as having increasing degrees of sanity because they're closer to the truth. When viewed in the light of the truth, okay, now he's capitalizing truth to make it co-eval with God. When viewed in the light of the truth, the average pattern of responses and behavior, which is the most common standard for measuring degrees of madness, would itself appear as a veritable form of madness. So then the average of wearing funny hats would now seem mad. And ordinary forms of madness, which have failed to reach even the average pattern, would present themselves as deeper levels of madness. So now I'm putting in those two quotes because they begin to circumambulate what Merwan's point of view is now ever since he's left Maharaj's ashram. His claim, at least, is that he is above the average. He may look mad. A lot of his, I'm prefacing all of this because there's a lot of chaotic behavior that goes on in Meherabad's life immediately after. I mean, some of the things he does, you have to say, well, they were right when they said he was mad when he was back in the, after meeting Babajan. So what I'm trying to say is that there are multiple reasons why this is so, and when we take the time to look at them carefully, we see this. And I'm going to bring in another one in a second, but I want to go through a couple more quotes from Meherabad. So here's Meherabad. It's 1955. This is at the gathering that's, these things are quoted in the back of Listen Humanity. This is a description of his subjective experience throughout his life, which was initiated with his encounters with his two masters. So, when I came near enough to him, talking about Upasni Maharaj, Maharaj greeted me, so to speak, with a stone which he threw at me with great force. It struck me on the forehead exactly where Babajan had kissed me, hitting with such force that it drew blood. Okay, this is the important part of the quote. That was the beginning of my present infinite suffering and delusion, which I experienced simultaneously with my infinite bliss in reality. So he's saying he's aware, he has a vision of reality that is beyond anything that we can perceive, in which he experiences bliss through that. But in trying to integrate and communicate to others through this integration, to experience that bliss state that he has, that brings on suffering. At the moment, he says, I experience both infinite bliss as well as infinite suffering. Once I drop the body, only bliss will remain. Now the point of this is that I'm claiming again that he's convinced that this is true, that this is the state, and it's from this state that he now has to somehow be able to begin to communicate to others what that state is. That's basically, not only is he doing that, but he's doing that because he wants to show others how they can enter into that state of bliss themselves and move closer to truth with a capital T, rather than continuing to be fooled or hoodwinked by the world they see around them. Wait a minute. Okay, looks like I got the same thing there. Okay. So now, given this philosophical background, primarily because if we examine Meher Baba's life during the period from 1922 to 1931, his behavior often appears chaotic and arbitrary. However, if we keep in mind the idea that Meher Baba was living in a way that is completely congruent with his vision of himself and his vision of the world, of what's important and what is unimportant, then we see his behavior very differently. So my argument is that Meher Baba was living in a way that he felt was fully congruent with what he believed was his spiritual vision and what he believed to be his spiritual work. My further argument is that these activities were an expression of an aesthetic of the sacred, i.e., that they were in pursuit of fulfilling a vision of spiritual beauty, a vision that was at once real and vital to Meher Baba and was simultaneously symbolically beautiful to those around him. In other words, his own charismatic personality and the beauty of the vision that he communicated to those around him was such that it caused him, against all odds, to stay with him. And you'll see as we go through what happened in the following subsequent 8 years, it was more than I would have been able to take, I can tell you that. So I want to add just one more lens through which to consider Meher Baba's approach to what he called his work before we continue on with the actual activities that he engaged in during this period from 22 to 31. So, if you'll recall, I've said that I'm not calling Meher Baba a shaman, but I do claim that he falls into a shamanic category. Likewise, I'm not saying that Meher Baba is a holy fool. You may have heard that expression. But I do claim that he falls into a similar category, that he used the techniques, or at least those techniques emerged from his work, in a way that's very much in that category. So here is one definition of the Eastern Orthodox Christian idea of the holy fool. And this is the very first paragraph, very first page of a kind of classic recent study on the holy fool in the Byzantium, the Eastern Orthodox world of Christianity. So the author says, holy fool is a term for a person who feigns insanity, pretends to be silly, or who provokes shock or outrage by his deliberate unruliness. However, the term does not apply to all such behavior. Extravagant conduct may qualify as holy foolery only if those who watch it assume that what lies beneath is sanity and high morality, even pious intent. The Orthodox Church holds that the holy fool voluntarily takes upon himself the mask of insanity in order that he may thereby conceal his own perfection from the world and hence avoid the vanity of worldly praise. A further stimulus to such behavior, to being a holy fool, in the Orthodox view, maybe as a comical, paradoxical form of spiritual instruction. However, the holy fool's indecorous behavior can be edifying only if he abandons his disguise, for otherwise, how would one tell him apart from a real, non-pretend fool or a delinquent? Yet, if he does reveal himself, the holy fool subverts his own vocation. In other words, if he lets people know what's going on, he subverts the whole discipline that he's adhered to. If he has no intention of edifying anybody, then he would far more easily avoid worldly renown if he were to retreat to a place of solitude. Yet he is drawn to company, to the very crowd whose devotion he ostensibly abhors. This is a basic paradox in the Orthodox conception of the holy fool. Now again, I'm not saying that Meherabad, I don't even like the phrase holy fool, but this idea of, one story that very consistent throughout Meherabad's life, and you could hear Erich say with even embarrassment, even years later embarrassment, Baba would announce at some point, all right, send this announcement to the newspapers. I'm going to break my silence definitely on the 4th of May, 1938. And Erich would say, Baba, please, we don't have to, why should we, are you really going to do it? What, are you questioning me? You know, he'd do this, but he would do many things like that. Either where he has some, what he called his intention regarding his spiritual work, or sometimes just it would appear to separate the wheat from the chaff, to keep people who were just curiosity seekers from coming around. So, oh yeah, there's more to this too. Associated originally with the church, holy fools have been studied mainly in a religious perspective. For most Orthodox believers, the holy fool has been among the most revered types of saint, but not all Orthodox writers have approved. This is some of the book Holy Fools in Byzantium and beyond. But that's my point, is that there's a category of behavior which, particularly in Meherabad's case, seemed to be a way to, first it saved him time because he really didn't care if people understood what he was doing or not. If you approached him by the heart, then none of this would matter. On the other hand, it seemed consistently he would do things, sometimes deliberately, sometimes just as a consequence of what he was doing at the time and not bothering to explain to people. But he seemed to set up a way to keep people from, another famous story is the Norina. They're in Europe, and Norina had met this countess or somebody very important that she really wanted Baba to meet, and he knew that she would be really helpful in this work and everything. And sometime during the meeting, Baba said, well, what about some music? Would you like some music? And Norina saying, Baba loves music. He knows that she loves music. This is going to be wonderful. And they get out the Victrola, which was a big operation in those days, and then he'd say, they played something, very classy, and play that one I like, that really snappy one, La Cucaracha, and and naturally the woman never came back again, and Norina was humiliated. But he said, Baba, why'd you do this? He said, she had no connection with me. So better twere done quickly. So I want to emphasize three aspects of Meher Baba's work during this period. Those are just different lenses, the lenses of understanding his perception of the world, his perception of his work, and I just put that out there as an example of technique that masters use, whether you think Holy Fool as a category is applicable or not. I just offer it as an example. So I want to emphasize three aspects of Meher Baba's work during this period. Training of his disciples or mondli, which started off in earnest. Learning how to best communicate his vision of cosmology and spiritual development, i.e. his religious narrative, to other people. And I think this was just as he had difficulty reintegrating, very painfully. He said it was great infinite suffering, and he said even throughout his life he had simultaneously infinite bliss and infinite suffering. Well, I think a part of this suffering in the world of illusion, and he seemed, if you look at the recently published Tiffin lectures, and you look at there's phases through which he goes through where he's trying to interpret for people and talk to people in ways where they can get some sense of his experience. So I think part of what he did during this period was he was learning how to best communicate his vision with others in the realm of illusion. And another thing he was doing was preparing Meherabad as a center for his work. Now, in other things I've published that are more sort of, you could say, pastoral, I'd say that he was preparing Meherabad as a place of world pilgrimage. He didn't say anything about that time. It's not really appropriate as a historian to just come in and impose this. This is part of the religious narrative, were I to say that. So, but it's clear that he was definitely preparing Meherabad to be a center for his work. This is evident as we go through this. So, I would say the primary emphasis during this period, and perhaps throughout his life, was training his disciples. And that, again, just the training of his disciples is symbolic for a learning process that anyone coming afterwards can benefit from as well. So although some activities may have done double duty, in other words, he may have been preparing Meherabad and he may have been working on ways to communicate his message, but those activities also were ways to train his disciples. So some of these teaching activities may have done double duties. Most can still be seen as either developing affectional bonds between people, himself and others, teaching obedience, and specific spiritual instructions in terms of cosmology and what the spiritual aspect should do, how they should behave, that kind of thing. So this is later than this period. This is the only picture we have of Meherabad in front of his little jopti. You can barely make it out here, but there's a little hut here, his jopti, where he went to live after he left his family, and this is his family later in life, but there's Jal and Shireen and Shariar, that's Audi Jr., this is the servant, and this is little Mani, the future chairman of the trust. So in January 1922, he leaves the family home. January to May, he stays in this jopti, a 10-foot by 6-foot hut on Ferguson College Road in Pune, and he gathers disciples who begin at this point calling him Meherabad. And he, as I said, he first began to really encounter people and draw people to him during the Kasba Peth period. This is a group photo of the Kasba Peth group. He gathers during this period with the Kasba Peth disciples, and they come to Ferguson College Road, and once a week he would go on every Thursday, which is Guru Purnima. They would, or Guru, is it always Guru Purnima or just?
It's not Guru Purnima, it's a Guru Dwara.
Guru Dwara, okay. Say it again.
Guru Dwara.
Guru Dwara. So it's the Guru Day, in other words. And so on the Guru Day, they would go and say prayers and artis to Upasni and Baba John at this little room that he had rented in Kasbapet. He also instructs at this time, this is very significant, he instructs Ramju to keep a diary, and it's the first of a lifetime of disciples documenting his every movement and action. There's very few people in the world who, starting at this period, he always had somebody, sometimes multiple people. You can download a handwritten book called the Combined Diaries, which is really from this period. And Ward makes a lot of reference to the Combined Diaries, uses it to place the timing of the Tiffin lectures when you read the Tiffin lectures book. And all his entire life, he had people documenting everything he did. This is very unusual. I don't know of any other person who you could say that about. And he didn't make a big deal about it. He just said, to somebody, take him aside and say, I want you to write down, keep a diary, write about what we're doing and that kind of thing. And there was always somebody at sometimes multiple people doing this. So, still 1922, in May, he leaves the Ferguson College Road area with 45 followers, 22 Hindus, 12 Muslims, and 11 Zoroastrians, and they walk to Bombay. Now, this is Pune. It always surprises me because I think of Pune being farther north, but Pune is south of Bombay. This is the route they took. They didn't walk all of it, but they walked enough of it that everybody was so exhausted, Baba finally relented and let them take a truck the remainder of the distance. Then in May, after they arrive in Bombay, he establishes the Manzili Meme in the Dadar section of Bombay, and they stayed there for some time. Till March 23, he closes Manzili Meme after 10 months. And this is he took kind of the serious Mandali. Now, Mandali, of course, means circle, and Mandali means a member of the circle, so these are just his circle. They came and lived with him, and he had a much tighter regimen of behavior, And to the extent, and he did this throughout his life, this is the first time he did this also, is he had them all sign contracts, repeat different contracts for different periods of time. And he would, there'd be various conditions, usually they weren't that big, but he had people sign them. You had to make a commitment of some kind to him and an acceptance of some period of time, you were going to do this or that, and then he made a promise in return of some kind or other. So then, 1923, the entire group goes to Khusru quarters in Ahmednagar for the wedding of Rustam and Frani Irani. This is Gulmai Irani's family residence in the home of Adi K. Irani and Rustam Irani. Rustam Irani being the one getting married, and he's marrying Frani, who is Mera J. Irani's sister. And this is a period, the first period when he becomes closer to Mera and sees more of Mera. He first met Mera, Mera first met him at Sikori at Bhupati Maharaj's ashram. So, in May of this same year, he takes his followers from Khusru quarters. There's people talking about him, and he gets angry and storms off, and everybody grabs their bag and baggage, and they follow him, and he walks way ahead of them, 6 miles. They're chasing him to get after him, so he doesn't, because they had another order during the Muslim period that they weren't supposed to leave him. They were all, no matter what he did and no matter what his subsequent orders were, they were supposed to stick with him. So they stuck with him and walked to south of Ahmednagar, 6 miles to what is now Meherabad. They worked there, stayed there for some time, began to repair an abandoned military camp that is later to become Meherabad. And it's interesting for several reasons. One is that apparently he didn't know where he was going or why he was going there. And apparently he didn't know that the home where he had just been living, Gulmai Irani's home, her husband, Khusru, owned this property. And ostensibly he didn't know this, but he's just started taking possession of it anyways. So 13 of his followers agreed to stay with him under more austere and demanding conditions than they'd even had at Manzali. Now this is pictures from that period. This picture over here is the old post office. These very stones here were later dismantled and used to make Meherabad Samadhi on the hill. But they lived in this building for a long time when they first got there. The men stayed in, this is the back side view of the Dharmshala, and this is the front side view of the Dharmshala, which was the main building there that they used for various functions. Later on, when Mera and the other women came and joined them, the women lived here. They cleaned up this and I think put a roof on it or whatever, but the ladies lived there and the men all stayed in this Dharmshala. So, 1923 now, in May to November, he takes 11 followers on an austere tour to Agra, Karachi, Quetta, Ahmedabad, Gujarat, and at one point they followed this by a 62-mile walk to Navsari, and this is the route that they took. Quite as no joke, this is Meherabad here, and this is way up in the north, right at the border of Afghanistan. And there's been much activity, military and Taliban going back and forth right in this very same area. So this is them getting ready to go out on one of their big walks. Excuse me. Yeah, and there, I wish I'd been able to get all the pictures, but there's some lovely pictures of Rusi and Goher and Katie Irani, who Rusi is their father, and they were living in Quetta, and that's when Baba first met Goher and Katie, and Rusi eventually moved the whole family to Ahmednagar, but that's another story. But so all of these things, he ended up in various places, apparently coincidentally, meeting up with people who were to be longtime followers here in the future. So in November of 1923, he wanders incognito with Gustaji, and this is something that, again, that throughout his life he did this more and more, where he would hide his identity when he was traveling, so he didn't get special treatment because he was becoming better known. So Gustaji and Behramji fasted with him severely, and he returns from there to Pune and then to Bombay. So you see already there's this chaotic, apparently aimless wandering, and it's hard to explain all this, and more things will be coming up. But The claim is, certainly the religious narrative, is that he was following his own vision of his work and how to best fulfill it. And no doubt, this was also included some very intense training of his modeling. So we get into 1924. You can see there's more wanderings going on. In February, he takes 8 followers to Persia, but cuts the tour short due to illness and returns to India. He takes a few disciples to Nepal, but they are refused entry. He sends disciples home and wanders alone for some days. And this, in 1924, when he sends these people home, this is the last time that we know of in his entire life, except for, I know of one other instance where just for an hour or two. This is the only time he was left alone. He went off by himself, did some things, just wandered, and since that time, since he got back from them, there was someone with him every moment, 24 hours a day, every single day. You always hear about how he had night watchmen, and there were all these, because ghosts would come and get him and everything. I just from an empirical point of view, a really fascinating, whatever his metaphysical or other reasons, I don't know of anybody who had somebody watching them 24 hours a day for their entire life. It's just a consequence of these things. So just historically, and again, there was no big project to do this. You always had some sort of aside or some excuse as to why he wanted someone to keep a diary and why he wanted somebody to sit at night watch and sit in the room with him and watch him while he slept or didn't sleep, depending on how you interpret those things. But that's just another interesting, very, just I think, fascinating fact about Meher Baba. So, in March of 1924, with some core Mondli, he settles again back to Meherabad. He's going back and forth. But, it would seem that he'd made up his mind earlier to use Meherabad as a base of operations, and yet as soon as they start to get settled there, he takes off and moves somewhere else. Now he's back at Meherabad. He initiates Gamela Yoga, which is a hard labor phase. Why do they call it Gamela Yoga? You can see this on this fellow's head here, and this is Vishnu, and I think this is Meramji, I'm not sure, but they are holding gamelas. Those are, we would call them a wok, the kind of things that you cook in, but in India you see at the roadside all the time, there'll be men breaking rocks in the hot sun with a hammer, and once the rocks are broken up, they put them in the gamela, and a woman will carry it on her head to the road, the spot in the road where they're building a road, and she'll throw them onto the pile and then go back, and they do this day in and day out. And this is the kind of work they were doing, hauling dirt and rocks and wood and trying to clean up Meherabad, doing Gamela Yoga, or just basically, that was his joke about yoga, that the yoga they were doing was basically hard work. Now at this time, also 1924, Mera, her mother Daulat, and 2 other women joined the group as cloistered nuns in the old post office buildings, and during this time, Mera's uncle, I believe it's her mother's brother, Colonel Irani, who you'll hear a lot about later, begins propaganda against Baba. He was it seems he had all kinds of sort of what he felt were practical reasons why people should despise Meher Baba, but it seems he really despised Meher Baba because he wanted to take care of his sister and her daughter and keep them safe and be the patriarch, and they preferred Meher Baba to him, and this was just, not only was Meher Baba all these scandalous things to Parsis, and he's a colonel in the army, obviously one of these people who's aspiring to be more British, and she chooses this obviously jungly guy who's gone native and wants to live with him. So it not only hurts him on that level, but it scandalizes the family, and so he started a big campaign for the rest of his life. And interestingly, when Meher Baba put his most important lovers on this, recently they built a tower at Meherabad, and the names are written around it of his most important lovers. Colonel Irani's name was on that tower. So, enough said about Colonel Irani. In June to December, he goes again with core men disciples to Bombay, Karachi, Quetta, then to Madras, Calcutta, Hardwar, Rishikesh, Baroda, Goa, etc., bowing down to 5,000 pilgrims and lepers. This is the first event that I know of where he did this thing where he bowed down repeatedly to people, something that another habit that he repeated throughout his life in equally astonishing numbers. Now we're up to 1925. In January, he returns to Meherabad again. The number of resident Mandli have now grown to 40. They've cleaned up the place. There's more people to stay. There's more activities going on there now. Thursdays and holidays, there are public darshans. This is an example of one of these, except this is actually Meherabad's birthday. I'm not sure if this is before or after 25, but it's just an example of a gathering of people at Meherabad. In July 9th, at 8:30 p.m., he announces, I'm now going, and from tomorrow I will not speak for 1.5 years. This was his original. I think originally he said more years than that, and said, Mehra said, Baba, do you have to do it for so long? And so he shortened it to 1.5 years. But it would certainly seem in retrospect, and it seems now, just as I was saying, he would tell the Mandli definitely on, March 10th, I'm going to do it, or whatever the date was, and then he wouldn't break his silence. It seems clear, in retrospect, that he planned from that date to never speak again. But at the time, he told people incrementally, and when it got to be 1.5 years, he said, well, maybe another 6 months, and then he keeps stretching and stretching it. Because people loved his singing voice, they loved his speaking voice, they couldn't even imagine the idea of never hearing him talk again. So, July 10, he begins his lifelong silence. And again, in terms of the aesthetics of religious symbolism, to me this is one of the most amazing symbolic. There's so many, as I think I've said before, symbols are multivalent. They have multiple meanings for different people and in different situations. And this is a symbol that apparently he chose to enact for as part of his ministry. And astonishingly, all the evidence points to his having kept this vow of silence for his entire life. So, from that time, he stayed in his jopti. This is a picture from the 30s, actually, of his jopti. In the background, lots of vegetation around it. And in the jopti, he wrote in this book, he started writing a book with all these, again, he's working out his, how to communicate his experience and the cosmology and the way of an aspirant, and he's writing all these things down while in silence in the jopti. In October, he shifts from the jopti to the table cabin under a neem tree by the road and continues writing in the book and giving darshan to visitors in front of the cabin. This is a period when more and more people are hearing about him. They've now heard that he is stationed at Meherabad, and again, every Thursday, Gurudwara, people would come there and do their artis and what have you, and get darshan from him. And at this time, he did it from the cable house, because he would just stay in there and then go inside. People would feed him, he'd come out, and he'd go back inside. And this is not at the table house, but this is sort of how it would be when he would meet with the Mandli. He'd just come out and then speak with them and then go back in. Again, not the kind of behavior you expect from a well-balanced, average person. November 19, he lights the Dooni fire in response to villagers' plea for rain. After that, almost immediately, it rains for 15 hours, and eventually the villagers come back and say, can you please stop it from raining? We've got enough rain now. And from the beginning, that is the beginning, rather, of a monthly lighting of the Dooni fire on the 12th of every month. And to my knowledge, from that date in 1925, it's been, I've certainly had the pleasure of being at several of them, and it's continued since that year. So they built if you're familiar with Lower Meherabad and the patch of land between the Dond Road and the railroad tracks, they built this big meeting hall they call the Sai Darbar Hall. It was near the post office, and it was built to accommodate the large crowds who were now coming weekly for darshan, and the Marathi arti was sung at this time in his praise. In 1926, Meher Baba composed his Bujawe Nar Gujarati arti, and then from that time both the Gujarati and the Marathi artis were sung. So at that time also in 1926, the first Meher school was built, other structures were built, and services were provided. There was a hospital and many other local things to serve Arangown, and also people would come from far away. food was being served, things like that. And eventually, around 500 people were living at this 1926. 500 people living at Meherabad. A few dozen dedicated mandali were living under Baba's strict orders, and others were employees and services and things going on. The mandali worked in school and in the hospital, and during this period also, the Tiffin lectures that have just been published were begun, and they kept going. And Tiffin simply means lunch. There'd be lunchtime lectures. They weren't every lunchtime, but periodically Bob would say, well, okay, we're going to get together at a certain time. And it wasn't that he would say, we'd get together and I'm going to give you a lecture. Usually they would just say, we'd get together, and as a part of their being together, he would start extrapolating on different things. And a particularly interesting aspect of this is if you read the Tiffin lectures and you look at the texts, they're extremely mental, they're extremely complex, and they're extremely, they look like footnotes or what have you to God Speaks. It's that kind of cosmology. It's almost exclusively cosmology, which means descriptions of the universe, how the universe works, as opposed to the kind of things you find in the discourses where it tells you how to behave, how to act. It's more of an abstract, structural picture of the universe. So again, although he's behaving in ways that seem erratic and perhaps unbalanced, he's coming out just offhand with very brilliant discourses on, again, one assumes, the sort of the nuts and bolts of his visionary experiences that he had at the hands of Babajan, and refocused as he came back into integration at the hands of Upasni Maharaj. So in March of 1926, Baba moves into a box cabin in the Sai Darbar Hall. It's just a little room for him to live in this big hall where people would come see him for darshan. And then in May, a few months later, he begins a 2-month stay in the water tank room on the hill, and I'm assuming that's what is now the library. Maybe not, because I know there's also a time when they said he would climb up and go in through the window. So it may have been on this side. It may have even been on this side on the right, as we're looking at this picture, is where Mara's room was when the ladies stayed on the hill. This room here is the library now, and on this left-hand side is now the museum room where the Comely coat and all these treasures are kept. But I know in '54, for example, the men who were on the hill with Meher Baba during the 3 incredible weeks would meet and have little Sahavas meetings in that room. So in October, Baba dismantles, you hear 500 people living there, there's all this stuff going on. He dismantles Meherabad and he relocates to Lonavala. This is in October 1926. November 1926, he returns to Meherabad and rebuilds the whole place and opens up the Hazrat Babajan School for Boys. This is, at the most, even if he started on November 1st and came back on, or rather started on October 1st and came back on November 30th, in only 2 months he completely demolishes this huge active city practically of 500 people and tears it down, and then, okay, we're going back and we're going to build it back up. In 1927, he stops writing and begins using the alphabet board. Previously, he would have a big stack of slates and he would write on the slates. And then he stopped writing on the slates in 27, uses the alphabet board. In May, he opens the Meher Ashram School for Boys and shifts it to Meherabad Hill. And this again is this little guy here is Ali Akbar Shapurzaman, our friend Alaba. And this is the back room, as I said, where was later Mera's room, and this is the library over on the left side. If you're familiar with this area, over on the right side is where the tin shed is, and Meher Baba's, what do you call that? Gadi, thank you. His little divan, little couch that he would sit on and give darshan on, is still there. So he shifts the school to Meherabad Hill. By October, 170 boys are enrolled, 14 of them from Persia. Beidel had gone back to Persia along with some other people and brought back, enlisted these boys to join the Meher Ashram school. The women, Maudley, were now living in an enclosed compound on the hill. While the school's going on, there's also a place where the women are doing various things for Baba. Now, in December of 1927, Mayor Baba began staying in the crypt room. Now, the crypt room is this room here, and he would meet people sometimes here. But this crypt room, it's not the exact same, it may be the same door, I don't know. It's not the same stones, and not in the same way, but this is where this little stone area is built over a pit, and that pit is where Mayor Baba is now buried. But he began his work with the Prem Ashram boys and with the boys on the hill in this period of, I think he spends 2 months, well, it's December, whatever time in December, it stays till the end of February, so it's somewhere between 2 and 3 months. He stayed in the pit there. And we get into 1928. January 1928, love outburst sweeps through Meher Ashram. Baba forms the Prem Ashram because some of the boys were having these spiritual experiences, and he wanted to separate them from the other boys who were trying to do their homework. And this is Chota Baba, who is in a completely absorbed state. And this is in that little pit that I was just describing. That's Chota Baba with him. That's Ali, who's going to figure in the film next week. And there's some very, very interesting connections with all this. I'm not sure who this student is, but obviously he's in some kind of a state there. So Baba remains in the crypt room until the end of February, but he continues fasting, even though he's come out now. He continues fasting until the end of April. In March, he sends Rustam, that's the one who'd gotten married, that's Adi Kairani's brother, and Gulmai's son. So he sends Rustam to the United Kingdom, to England, to bring boys from the West for the Prem Ashram. He tries, and he can't bring any, but he does on the way meet Meredith and Margaret Starr, who again later come back with him to Meherabad and also stay at Toka, and he plays a big role in getting people connected with Meher Baba, and then other things happen, which we'll talk a lot about that, or at least some about that next time.
Margaret was the aunt of Aunt Ross.
Yeah. She married. Did she marry Kenneth? Or no? Kenneth is her brother.
Right.
So Ann Ross's father was the brother of this woman who was married to Meredith Starr. So we in our own community we have a connection to this. Yeah. So in April, Hazrat Babajan comes to Meherabad, which is a momentous occasion, and meets Baba and the schoolboys at the railroad tracks. And from that point on, I forget what happens, but Baba, that may have been when he decided to shift the entire. So again, remember everything was going strong. Completely closes down Meherabad. Goes to Lanavla for a month and a half or something. Comes back, opens up Meherabad again. Now everything's going fine at Meherabad. Let's move the entire operation to Toka, which is, if you've ever been to Aurangabad, Toka is about halfway between Ahmednagar and Aurangabad. So he takes the entire Meherabad colony and schools and shifts them to Toka. This is a picture of them. This is Meredith Starr over on the left side here, and there's Margaret Starr. Let's make her Ann Ross's aunt, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's Ann Ross's aunt there at Toka with all the people there. And there's other people, there's relatives of Farshid is also in this group. I can't pick him out, but I know if Farshid was here, he could pick him out. So Meredith and Margaret Starr come, and they stay for 6 months. In November, so we left in June. November, at least is a little longer period of time. The Toka Ashram is again dismantled. Most of the boys this time are sent home. Most of the Mandali are sent elsewhere. And Baba and the core Prem Ashram boys and Mandali all return to Meherabad Hill. And this is most of the Mandali at that time. Now, 29 to 31 are the years leading up to Meher Baba's first trip to the West. And I would like to go into detail about all that, but I thought it would be easier, since I've done a whole presentation of 2 20-minute videos about what goes on and what the connections are. I'm going to refrain from doing any more of that now, and I'm going to end here. And next week, March 28th, I plan to show 2 20-minute videos on Meherabad's work with Ali. And this really, it's not only historically significant because of just the role of the events in Meherabad's life, but it's a very interesting, I feel, symbolic link between Meherabad's work with the Prem Ashram boys, Meredith Starr and his activities, Rustum and his activities, and his connections to the West. There was something, for whatever reasons of his own, that Meherabad felt he needed to accomplish before he could go to the West. And he tried to get Ali to this place called Mashhad in Iran. And all kinds of things kept intervening. No, couldn't happen. And finally, they get to Mashhad, and within a couple of weeks he got it. And without telling anybody, Ali, Chanji, and Rustum, I think, just the 3 of them, accompanied, and a lot of people were angry that they didn't get to go. Without telling anybody, the 3 of them got on a boat and left for the West. And that will be the tale that we will tell. Some of you may have already seen it because I did show it here before, but hopefully in this context there'll be more there. So any input or questions are welcome. I just want to say that I zipped through all that, partly to show, I mean, they're historically important events, but this is how, okay, this young boy, normal Parsi boy, suddenly comes into the company of these masters, has this totally disorienting experience, and emerges from that experience, and then with supreme confidence, and you can see the confidence in most of these pictures, supreme confidence, he starts doing these things which, I remember, I often quote this, Zoe's father, reading about Meherabad, he said, he seems like a nice guy, but he never really could get his life together. He'd try something and then it didn't work out, so he'd tear it down, and then he'd say, oh no, I think I'll try that again, and he'd do it. It's really too bad he couldn't really, kind of focus better. And so that's how it appears to someone when you don't, when you're not, certainly when you're not embracing his own vision of what he's doing and his own vision of how this all should unfold. What he's doing, how he's doing it, I've tried to show, and that's what I'm going to continue to try to do throughout these talks, is that there's something about the symbolic activities and the charismatic nature of his personality that is it has an aesthetic, a particular aesthetic to it, that is an expression of beauty and an expression of spiritual beauty for the people who embrace this narrative. And that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Any questions or thoughts? Or
one thing that, back at the beginning, the point you made is really interesting, that for a young Zoroastrian lad, there was no career path out of your culture.
No, not only a priestly path to be a dastur, yeah.
And that's clearly not anything like unrecognized. This is unrecognizable.
Well, it's recognizable in the sense that it's totally regressive. If you remember me talking about Jung and how people think, well, Jung is just regressive. They don't see him as being supranormal, they see him as being abnormal. And this is just totally abnormal. He's regressing, he's gone native, is what the British would say. He's gone native, he's embracing this crazy Hindu thing, and they're all buying it, and he's just pulling the wool over their eyes. This is Colonel Irani's trope, is that he's just, everybody knows as Zoroastrian can't be a master. He's just fooling all these people. He couldn't get work doing anything else, so he's doing this.
I remember one time having a conversation with Dolly Dastur. I think probably my first trip to India, and I was saying, well, my parents, my father, it just doesn't make sense to them that a human being could be God. And she said, oh, my father's exactly the same way. And that was part of Zoroastrian culture that you didn't have. There was Zoroaster, but you don't have.
But he was a prophet. He was not a god, he was a prophet. And their representation of God is one of the most archaic and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's very beautiful, but it's fire. I mean, this goes back to prehistoric man, you know, the worship of fire, the love of fire, that fire should represent the deity. That's a long haul to an anthropomorphic god of any kind, let alone a human being God. So yeah, there's just there's no wedge anywhere in there for it. And yet, a lot of Parsis just charismatically were very drawn to Meherabad.
Particularly, I was thinking about that his early followers were lots of young Parsis.
Yeah, a lot of family members.
Part,
a lot of family members.
Family members.
Yeah.
And then, but he also simultaneously was attracting Hindus and Muslims. Right?
Yeah, and what's interesting is that, like in Cosmopeth, for example, he seemed to almost primarily attract Hindus. At Upasani Maharaj's ashram, which is mostly Hindus, he attracted mainly Parsis. They were like Parsis, it almost seemed like the Parsi route to Meherabad went through Sikori. And I haven't looked at like statistics or figures about that, but I just know that, you know, Gaimai, Golmai, the whole Irani family from that side, our friends Minu and Aimai Barucha, and it's just a bunch of Parsis who just loved Upasani Maharaj, and then he either then followed Baba. In Minu Barucha's case, he went to school with Jal and Padri, and who's the other one?
Gani.
Hmm? See?
Gani Munsif?
No.
He didn't go to school with him?
Anyways, he definitely went to school with Padri and Jal, and because he went to engineering school and got a job at the Nasik powerhouse, and was walking down the road, and there's his buddies Jal and Padri, and they're walking with this other guy with long hair, you know, and this is Mayor Baba, and Baba said, "Oh, you can come, you know, anytime to the ashram." So he did. He didn't really believe in Baba. But then he started reading these books and the Meher journals that were being published at the time. And he started really taking Baba seriously. And Baba sent him to Upasani. And then when he would go to Upasani, because at that time Baba wasn't seeing Upasani. And Baba's story, Meher Baba's story, was that he did not want to go to Upasani because Upasani was going to keep trying to take his burden from him. He said, "No, I'm taking it. It's my responsibility. I'm going to do it." But he adored Upasani. He always, you know, even long after that, did his arti. And he would send Minu, and he'd come back and say, "So tell me, what's the old man doing? What's he up to? What was going on at the ashram?" He really wanted to know that, but he wouldn't go himself because it was just to keep the boundary there. You know? So yeah, that was an opposite way. But a lot of people, when a lot of Parsis seem to have gotten drawn there mysteriously, coincidentally, during the time that final 6 months there. Mera and her mother, that's another. They were Mera's first trip there was Baba's last day there, which is very interesting.
So there was no tradition for Zoroastrian to become a guru, but Parsis visited Hindu.
Yeah, and I don't know why that would be, except they were each one of them, had a story of despair of some kind, and someone would say, "Well, this is master who will really make you feel better," and so that was because of some tragedy or some despair in their life. Something really drove them to this crazy idea of going to a guru, you know.
And they wouldn't necessarily see them as divinity.
Yeah, and I don't know how they did perceive
And
it.
Maharaj, I don't know if this was connected or not, but he was an Ayurvedic physician.
Mm-hmm.
So that may have been, you know.
A rationalization of some kind. Yeah, he's a doctor, yeah. Yeah. Indeed. So, thank you all. Yes.
Another thing I just will share, it's just about Balaji. When he was in Chicago, probably one of the trips in the late 90s, I invited my mother to a tea, and Terry Veras also had her mother come. We're both Jewish background, and all Bao it spoke about was Christ, and it reminds me of that holy fool.
Yeah.
So Terry was very upset. Afterwards, she asked him, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Well, it's the truth." And anyhow, I just thought.
Well,
I would share
Jesus
that.
was Jewish. Just tell me.
That's so interesting.
What's the problem?
Yeah.
But yeah, and another occasion, someone will say something, I've been, I don't remember specifics now, but I know that I've heard stories where someone would say something that you would think would be completely the wrong thing that would drive them away, and it interested the person. So there's got to be something else going on there. So I hope you all can make it to the film, or not, whatever. I'm glad you all came tonight, and we'll just keep doing it. Got 5 more. Actually, 7 more if you count the films.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bala.